Blah 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 blah. Blah 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 blah. Blah 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 blah. Blah 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 blah. And here we go. If you follow me, we will get there. Oh, it is a time again. Oh, need to get a beverage, and I will be on. All right, ladies and germs, it is that time again. We must delve into the world of 3D modeling and realize how much of a pain in the butt it is from time to time. All right, I have my tasty beverage sitting next to me and my delicious bug, and we're ready to begin. So you can see just from, if you've joined us from Monday, I've added a few things. I've gone back in and finalized this project so that we can move on to something else. What I did was I remodeled a rectangle, a box like this, and I predicted, I'll show you how it started out, and I went ahead and put in the number of segments that I wanted to make, in this case 4x7. So over here you put the length and width segs, short for segments, and then it automatically has it all spaced out just like you want it, so that you're already ready to go and you don't have to worry about making any lines or cutting or things like that. And then add an editable poly to it. And the difference from last time to this time is that I went in and selected each row of segments, and I made another segment on either side really tightly. So there is essentially 3 segments right here, 3 segments right here, and then did the same thing for the sides, 3 segments right here. And then I went in and took the middle segment, brought it down so that it was basically a V. So you had this segment, and then this middle segment went down. So you had a little trough. The only difference that we did is that I added another line on either side of the trough, right there and right there. And that just keeps it from this trough being pulled apart when the mesh smooth gets applied to it. This turbo smooth right here, you can actually see now how tight the edge is. I mean, it's still not a hard edge, but it's definitely defined enough where you can see that it'll do what we need. And did that for both sides, so that when we hit F4 to turn off our wireframe but keep the solid going, we can see that it's clearly visible. We've got a nice little pattern going. It's not obstructing the sides, which is probably fine. Nothing on the bottom, it's all flat. So this thing is going to work out. And you could even print this thing off as it is right here. And it would be it'd be a very tight little area, but it'd be a 4x7 area that you could theoretically put other things on top of it, and then you would have your battle map. It's a really tight one. Then, once I did that, and I've got my turbo smooth on, as you can see over here, there's not that many polygons to speak of. It's really kind of spread out. It's because I've got iteration set to 1 over here. It's the basic, lowest level of making something smooth. And I cranked it up to something like 4, I think, which is what brings me over here. Let me move that back down to 1. This, what I did here, unfortunately, well, this is the later half. This is really the second half. So you can see here that it's still the box with the edible poly that I already showed you how to get the trough. Then I had the turbo smooth. In this case, I did add 4 iterations to make it a very high, dense number of polygons. And then I went in and I wanted to add some bumpiness to this to make it kind of look like a grassy texture. And if you went in there and dry brush this thing, it would actually look pretty good, because you could dry brush it dark, and then, or you could base coat it dark green or something like that, and then dry brush with a lighter color right on top of it on the points. It would look pretty cool. But in order to do that, because I didn't want to apply the noise to this trough, I didn't want to apply the noise to this side or the bottom. I wanted it just to be on specifically these squares. And that's where this poly select comes in. Essentially what it does is it's a modifier that allows you to just select certain parts of an object, certain number of polygons, not necessarily all of them, because that deceives the purpose, but a certain number. And then instead of deselecting it, you literally just collapse it so that there's still that little square right next to the right of poly select. That means that you still have them selected. You can actually see on the screen they're still red selected. If I were to deselect that poly select, then all of this would be unselected, and it would not be proving its purpose. But what that does is that when I add a modifier on top of it, which is noise in this case, it will only apply to the polys that I have selected on the poly select below. It's really powerful in that you can go in and add a modifier just to that poly select. And in fact, I can go in and add another poly select on top of the noise. Select, for instance, this section right here, and then put a different noise modifier on top of that, and that noise will only apply to the poly select below it. So it would ignore the rest of them. It would just acknowledge the one directly below it. So it's really kind of a nice feature, and it allowed me to go in there and add the noise. And even though it looks really bumpy, keep in mind the majority of that square is going to be an entire base is going to be fitting most of that. I mean, you're talking this size. So it doesn't matter that there's some unevenness. It's the fact that if you go in and look at it from the side, yeah, there's some unevenness, but there isn't like one piece higher than the others. It's all pretty much comes up and crests at one point and nothing higher than that. And that's because of the noise modifier. I had it set in this regard to, well, let's make it an even 1. So it's nice and even. But you set it to 1, and that means that none of this noise that is just randomly being generated, none of it will go above 1 millimeter, period. So you know for a fact that all of the peaks here at the highest point. It could be 1 millimeter, so therefore you won't have any imbalance. So it's perfectly fine to have something like that, and it gives it a nice little effect of grass without obstructing the grid, and then still being able to use it. I could make a huge battle map, something like 20 by 20, which is pretty good size, and do that whole thing like this, and it would be a great base model. In fact, I probably will add one to it, because you never know when you need one. And it wouldn't take that long to print either, because you could make it hollow on the bottom so that it would just have the edge. So all this would be gone, so it'd be a lot thinner to print. Now from here, I went in and I chopped some holes, evenly dispersed, 2 by 3, and this was solely for the trees, as we were making them earlier. And I went in there and made sure this time that the number of sides here is equal to the number of sides on this. Now, before you go saying, well, I see a whole bunch of polygons, aren't those all sides? It's not so much. The general shape of this is not perfectly circle. It's definitely got 12 sides on it. Even though it's rounded, you can still see that there's 12 sides for the most part. And it's kind of in a general shape to it, I guess. And that's all it really matters, because it's all it has to do is just go fit in the hole. So if we go in here, for instance, and I want to hold down Shift and drag, so we make a copy, make sure that we have a copy, not an instance. And then we go in here and get a little closer, like the Big Red commercial used to say. We can get in real close and move it around, and you can see if I can get just enough. You can actually see if you were to put the piece in there, Microsoft accounted a problem. Excellent. I really don't care. You need to fix your account. I don't think we do. All right. It will fit just fine in there. It may be a little loose, but it's better to be loose than too tight, because if it's the same size, and I can't even stress this enough, because I've had this problem numerous times. If it is the same diameter on both sides, it won't fit. Even though you would think, okay, well, wait a minute, the diameter's 5 millimeters and the hole's 5 millimeters, shouldn't it fit? No, because the way the printer goes, it's not quite exactly perfectly 5 millimeters on either side, and you'll have just a perfect equidistance on both of them, and one will act like it's too big. So it's good to make the hole, not the peg, but the hole in this case, slightly bigger. I've done it as much as, I want to say, I've done it as much as 0.4 millimeters on all sides, a big 0.4 millimeter gap. And that usually works, but sometimes I get that and it feels like it's a little too loose. I definitely would not go any lower than 0.2. That's really, really pushing it. So, you know, 0.2 and 0.3 is going to be your ideal gap where you'll have most success on putting the thing in there. And like I said, he just fits it right on in there. What I did wrong was I made the stem bottom a little bit too long, which is fine. This blue piece here was the a guide that I was using to make sure that I had it right on the grid number. But you can see that the actual holes actually goes all the way through it. It doesn't really matter if you're going to poke some holes through these things, whether you make it, you know, where it only goes halfway down and then there's actual base to this hole, or if it goes all the way through the ground. It really doesn't matter. It's not going to make that big of a difference. It's not going to be blaring, you know, a glaring type of effect on the table, because number one, you're either going to have a mini on top of it, an object inserted into it like this, Or you're going to have one of the possible choices to have a peg that fits into it. And basically, it's just a plug that I'm going to have provided. So let's say that you only want one tree in this whole area, but you do want one tree. Well, you don't want all these 5 holes in there, so you want to plug them in. Well, that's where the plugs come in. You print out 6 plugs, you print out this base, and then you put in the plugs whenever you want. Now, the reason why I would say cutting the holes all the way through is a better deal is that if you're going to use plugs, it's a heck of a lot easier to shove the plugs out of the holes. If you don't push them all, if you don't cut a hole right all the way through these bases and you put a plug in there where there's actually a bottom to this hole and it's like right here, you put the plug in, how are you going to get it out? Unless you had some kind of a grip, or if assuming that the plug is pretty close to the surface, you're hoping that there's a little bit of a lip, like the plug doesn't go all the way into the hole, it's not flush, because you're going to have a grip on that to pull the thing out. If you leave it like this, then you just put the plug in there, and then you just put your finger on the bottom right there, and you just push it right on out, and out it comes. A lot easier that way. So I would recommend just pushing the holes all the way through. It helps with the geometry because now it knows that there's a hole there all the way through. It doesn't have to worry about anything special. You seal that hole up, and you make it where this base is solid, but this top has a hole in it. And then it has to like calculate all of the geometry that goes into these holes and make it, it has to know that it has to go down so many millimeters, but then there's a polygon at the right here. But then there's another polygon on the bottom here to make this whole thing sealed. It's just not as much of a pleasantry as you would think. So I would recommend punching the crap out of the thing. Delicious. If anybody cares, tonight is chocolate milk stout from Four Hands Brewery. Delicious. It's got a gingerbread hint. I have yet to find any gingerbread in this. Tastes pretty much like stout and nothing more. Alright, so let's get rid of this bad boy. We don't need them. We made a copy. Over here, I have my master tree. This is the one I actually modeled, and it's called Master Tree over here. I made sure I named it so I knew what I was doing. And that has a peg. Then I went over here and made a copy of that master tree. And in a sense, it's identical, but I can do anything I want to this thing because it's a copy. I'm not going to mess with this master tree because that's in case I make a mistake, I can make another copy. So this is identical. It's got a peg. And from this one, I increased the height to make it a little different. That way you have a couple of different trees. And then I shrunk it to make a midget tree. Same with it's more like a dwarf tree with the trunk being that wide and all that. But now you got 3 different options to kind of break up the monotony of the trees so that it doesn't quite look the same. The orange, I removed the pegs entirely. That way they can be freestanding. It was just a simple matter of deleting the peg and capping the hole. We've done that before. The interesting one on the last one is the female end. Now, what we did with that one is I grabbed if I turn off Mesh Smooth and go to my Edit Modifier, hit F3, you can see this a little bit later. I grabbed all of these vertices along with the vertices right here along this bottom edge here, because this is a part of the peg. And I shoved them all up into the object so that it reverses itself. So in this regard, when I move over here, you can actually see when I turn it off, it's the same exact as the peg, but now it's shoved inside the object itself. And actually, it's not very clean because it's got, see this artifact? This is what's called an artifact. Whenever you see like weird polygons and it does like this weird flickering, usually means that there's 2 polygons on top of each other and they don't like yourself. So we're going to remove that real quick. We're going to figure out what's the deal here. Want just to select. I'm going to select all that. Alt to deselect all that crap. Now it says I have 2 polys. selected, which I actually do. One right there, one right there. So that means that it's not overlapping anything, but it's a paper thinned object, which is not always good. And it probably means that it needs to be lowered down. So what do? Let's go with the border here and see if we can't grab it. Nope, can't go with the border. Let's see with the edge. Yes, we can. All right, grab the edge. Over here there is loop on the right, and that's going to select all the edges around this rim, like that. Now, because I've done 3D modeling for a while, and I just kind of have a feeling of knowing where this is, my guess is that this edge is above where it needs to be. In other words, this is the top, this black area is the top of this hole, if you will. This little polygon ring that is popped up above that should be lower. So I'm going to lower it down and see what happens. And sure enough, I'm right. Because it just went down and there's no... It was basically the ring that I put in there to tighten the bottom of the peg. Like that. So when we put it on to mesh smooth, turbo smooth, it works just fine. Oops. If I could do this. Okay, here we go. Well, I can't see anything. Oh. It is super dark in here. They really made it literally dark. But yeah, that basically, here it is. It shows you that it's nice, clean, and you don't have any more object like that. Unfortunately, I did that. I made a copy like 2 times, so I got to go in here real quick and clean this up. It won't take but a second. Go in here, grab a loop, push it down. Not that far, just equidistance, kind of like the one up here is the one down there. That way you have a nice 90-degree corner right there. No big deal. Turn your turbo smooth back on, and then move on to the last one. Go inside. We must go inside. Turn on turbo smooth. Get your edge on. Oh, this was instanced. We know this was instanced because, number one, it already did it for us, and number two, all the lettering is bold over here. To uninstance this so that it's independent of itself and it doesn't get changed, click this middle button right here. It says Make Unique. You can only do it one time. In order to, when you click on Make Unique, this object is almost nearly forever permanently unique, where you can never make these two identical ever again. You cannot copy and like an instance over here. If I make an instance and I go and start moving stuff, watch the other one. See how they both do that? That's what's an instance. And it helps out when you're making like street lights and things like that. You got 4 million street lights, you want to change like the height. You make them instance, that way they can all do it together. But when you click on Make Unique right there, of course it goes back and it's by itself again. The problem is, let's say that you made it unique and you're like, crap, I really want it to be unique again with this one. The only way you can do that, there are scripts, which we're not going to get into because that gets really complicated, but this program itself is scriptable. You can write scripts that basically program Max to do things that it necessarily wouldn't otherwise do, one of which is making 2 objects unique. You can actually select everything that are identical. Let's say these 2 pieces here, which they are right now. You would select these 2, you'd run the script, and it would make them both unique to itself. But for the most part, without that script, you are SOL. So turn that back on. When I am ready to export, I'll turn on that last turbo smooth, but we don't need to right now because we've got everything we want to ready to go. So what are we going to do tonight? Well, we're going to discard all of this for now, and we're going to go back to the dwarf house because that's where we started to begin with, or at least I did. We're going to save it. Go to cluster. Actually, it's not where we want. Gnome tree. Dwarf house. And open. Because what we're going to do tonight, we're going to, I've got lots of lights in this scene because I believe I was trying to render this thing. I believe I was. Turn off the cameras. We're not going to get into that stuff. We just want this. Now, we want to make sure that this thing is still scaled per exactly where we want. So we need to make one 12.5 in radius, 25 in height, and then we move it to the front of the building, and you can see it's pretty much the same size. It might not necessarily fit through if the door was real, not fake, but yeah, it's close enough. But we know that it's scaled properly. Now the question is, how tall is this bad boy? Because I just sort of made it up as I went. It is about 101 millimeters tall. And if I go over to millimeters to inches and put in 100, it is going to be just under 4 inches in height for all you Americans out there. So it'll be decent size, but it's not going to be so ridiculously big that printers can't do it. In fact, I want to say that the Micro 3D printer that usually sells for like $199 because it's $100 off on discount lately. It's like $200, and it prints out dinky little prints, but it still prints out stuff that you could use. You could print out miniatures all you want. It's plenty good size for that, and it's dirt cheap. And Facebook just absolutely exploits the crap out of that advertisement, so you can't miss it. But what I was saying is, I think it actually prints this. This would fit inside the printer. Maybe just barely, but it would do it. All right, so what are we going to do here? This is one piece. We have already gone in and done so. We're going to convert it to an editable poly just because it was a pro boolean. I'm going to see if we didn't crash the computer by doing that. Basically, this is one piece. We have fused all the pieces together. Everything fits. The ferns, the knots, the squirrel, the birds, both on top and bottom, the window, the door, all of which is one piece. And that's important because if these were separate pieces just hovering in each other, or if you would just use the attach tool that we've used in the past, this thing will not print. And it will not print what you think. It will print literally one of the pieces, and the rest of the pieces will just come up in air. Or it might not even work itself. So it's important that these things get pieced together so that when you're ready to go, you're exporting one file. And that's what we're going to try to do tonight. Now, fair warning, we're not going to be doing the actual printing process. We're going to get it up to the point where it's ready to click print, and then we'll worry about printing later because it's going to take hours, and I'll do that on my own time. But fair warning, the software I'm about to use is called Slicer. It is provided by the company Prusa, who makes the printer that I bought, the i3 MK3. And I have yet to use it. I'm used to using other programs because there are tons and tons of slicers out there. It's the term that you use for the program that you apply right before the printer actually gets to start printing. It is considered the printer settings or printer preset. And you bring in this file into it and you figure out how it's going to print and if you need supports and things like that. And they'll even tell you like how long it's going to print before it starts, which is really nice. How much filament you'll need. Some of them are that good. It tells you, hey, you need like half a kilo of plastic. Fine. If you know that you don't have a half a kilo of plastic loaded up, you probably better change spools. So the first thing you need to do in Max, and Maya does the same thing, they're all built in with an export file format. You go down to export, you click on export. Make sure when you're doing this, I'm going to double check, but I'm going to unhide all, and I'm going to hit Z just to make sure I've got nothing but this in the scene. Because it sometimes has a tendency of exporting everything that's hidden too, and you'll have this mess. But in this case, it's just the tree, so you're fine. So go back to export. Find a safe place that you want to export this stuff in. And I'm going to go into Portfolio, scroll down to Simple Polytricks, Fantasy, Gnome Tree, and that'll be good enough. And then, once you're in the same spot, it defaults to FBX and Max. That's not what you want. I can't remember what Maya defaults to. It's one of the many different file formats you can use. All of these things can be exported. You can literally export it as just about everything, including a DWG file, which is kind of crazy. Because if you do, and you bring it in AutoCAD, if it is the right version of AutoCAD, it actually will kind of import it as a 3D object into AutoCAD, if you can believe that, which AutoCAD is just one of the worst things to use for 3D modeling. Stereolitho. It is the proper name for STL, which is the universal standard file format that every single printer except one uses. There is unfortunately a company that makes a printer called MakerBot. And it looks neat. The MakerBot printer looks freaking cool. It's all enclosed. It's got a neat little door you can open up, and it's got its own little illumination inside it. It's cool. But they, for some reason, think it's important to have their own file format called MakerBot. It's literally written out like .MakerBot, I think, is the file suffix. It's stupid. And you have to bring it into their special software, which is free. So it's not like they're like benefiting from you having to buy their software just to export it in from an STL to a MakerBot file. It's just there's a simple nuance of not being able to be competent enough to make a product that, will accept an STL file. They have their own reasonings, and it's all marketing hogwash. But nevertheless, 99.9% of the printers out there are going to take an STL file just fine. We're going to name this Dwarf House, even though I originally named it Gnome Tree. And we're going to save it. Now, on the export STL file, this is going to be the name of the file. It's kind of weird in the way that this works, but when you transfer the file over to your printer, and if the printer has an interface where it actually reads files that are like in your USB that you plug into the printer and you load up your file from that, the printer often will read this name rather than the file name that you just saved to your hard drive. Why? No idea. It's the exact same thing. You could name this Poo Poo Butt, and it would read up as Poo Poo Butt in your printer, but it would not read it. But your export file would still be Dwarf House. Who knows? I keep things consistent, so I know what it is. Binary is what you always want to stick with. ASCII is nothing close to being what you need to use for a printer. It does not keep the same programming of the 3D elements that you used in Max. You lose a lot of things when you change that. And you can use selected only if you want to. If you have the object selected and you can try to click that, it theoretically should just export what you have selected. I've had that happen in the past where it works just fine. I've also happened where it doesn't work just fine. Nevertheless, okay, and it says no data to export. Well, because I didn't actually click on the damn thing. Let me do it again. Sorry. Let's do a file. Okay. Okay, that did it. If you don't have any errors, it did it. That's the thing. It doesn't tell you if it did it or not. Now, I already have the slicer program ready to rock. It's already turned on. This thing comes with the printer of Prusa, like I said. But again, you can have all kinds of different slicers that you want. It doesn't matter. Over here on the right, I just like this software that it's made for the printer because it automatically defaults to recognizing that I've got a printer, original Prusa i3 MK3. It automatically knows that I've got it hooked up. It automatically reads it. And then I can go in here and actually change this, which is basically how good I want my print to be. If I'm doing a test, I'm going to set that at 0.2 millimeters. And what that does is it makes essentially your layers 0.2 millimeters thick before it goes to the next layer. And as a result, you're going to have more jagged edges than you would otherwise. When you're wanting to make a mold like I'm planning on doing in the future, and you want to use a 3D model in order to make a casting, you definitely want to take the time. And even though people will say, well, you're wasting more plastic because you're not going to tell the difference, but I believe you can tell the difference between 0.05 millimeters and 0.1 millimeter. And it's right there in the top. If you're going to make a mold, why try to save plastic on this one print if it's a final print? Now, if you're testing it, don't do this. But if it's a final print, you know it's going to print good, and it's just a matter of quality now. Why cut corners so that your mold is going to not look as clean as it would? You want it to make it as absolute best as you can. You want it to print it nice and slow, take its time. It will take a lot longer, but in the long run, if you're casting, that's the whole point, because you're going to be able to quickly make molds in the future, or casting in the future with your mold. So for right now, I'm going to just do 0.2 because this would be a test. Again, I'm not going to print it out. It's not even turned on right now. Now we need to bring it in. So over here, again, I'm making this up as I go. Click on add because that seems like that's the place to go. Oh, it did. And then here are, by default, several different STL files that it gives you. One's a tree frog. And it literally will make you a little tree frog. I mean, these are ready to go. You click these, you click print, and you just set your settings and you're good to go. These have already been built by Prusa. Prusa beer opener, that's something that'd be kind of cool to print. Gear bearing is pretty neat. It literally is just what you think, and it's a workable gear. The castle's cool. It's a little bitty dinky castle, though. Batman, which I have no idea how they get away with doing that with the licensing, but they do. The most famous one of all these choices is Mr. Benchy up here at the top, 3D Benchy. That is almost a universal object that is on every single printer out there for testing purposes. Benchy is a little toy steamboat, or a tugboat rather, I should say. And it looks like something straight out of Mickey Mouse's Steamboat Willie from the 1920s. It is just a simple little boat with a little roof on the front where the wheel would be. And many people use this as the testing purpose to see if they can print this Benchy off, short kind of for benchmark. That's where they get the Benchy. Then you can go in there and actually print it off, and if it prints right, then you know you're good to go with your settings. It doesn't take much material, it doesn't take much time to print, and that's why it's really good for that. Are we going to use any of those? Absolutely not. I'm going to navigate into that, down to simple polytricks, and in fantasy, and a gnome, and there's my dwarf house. It's already ready to go. It recognizes it as STL file. You like the little icon to the left of it, little teardrop. That's good, because then it knows, oh yeah, that's an STL file. Bring it in. So we click on OK. It's processing, and bang, 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 it's in. Just like that. Now, navigation around this is pretty much like a lot of them. Left mouse button, if you hold it down, you can spin the round. If you hold the middle mouse button, it moves it laterally. And I presume, right mouse button does the exact same thing as left. And then if you use the middle mouse wheel, you can zoom in and out. Now, this whole space right here is my printing area. It actually shows the blue line, which shows how high up there I can print. So my printer has, technically, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it's not actually that size. I think it's a little bit bigger, but it may not be. That may be pretty close to my max size. But I know that it prints pretty high too. And I want to say that that blue is the marker of how high I can get it to print. It usually can tell. It usually will tell you if you get it too high or too big, and it's out of the whole scene. Then basically it'll give you a warning saying, you know, this is not going to print. It's got to be inside. Start being behave. It comes on at 100% scale, which is what we want because it's 4 scale on my floor. And everything looks good. There's no errors. There's some roughness here and there. It's not the smoothest. That bark really kind of driving me up the wall, but yeah. Nice thing about this is that you can use acetone, and if you use, I want to say you have to dilute it, but if you use it, you can actually go over the edges here, and it will kind of melt it, but not really. And it smooths that bad boy out. And you definitely want to do that before you do any molding and casting, things like that. Next, we can go down here where it has 3D and then preview and then layers. Let's do preview. Cool. It's a nice preview. Layers. It seems to be absolutely nothing. Let's go back to this. The main 3D. What is 2D? Does that look? Oh, that's the base. Or is it? Oh, I see. So this, I believe, is going to be, if I'm not mistaken, when the Prusa starts or any printer, it prints out this sort of outline that encompasses all of your model, so that you know the absolute boundaries of your objects, and so it makes this kind of a plastic outline. It's not the gray; it'll be this white little bar, and it'll print that little flat, and it'll only be as thick as whatever you set it to, 0.2 millimeters or whatever, and it kind of outlines the whole thing, and it has its own reasons, but I could care less. All right, I want to know, let's see, filament settings. I know for a fact I'm at 1.75 millimeters. There are 2 different kinds of diameters on printers. 1.75 is the most common. You can get one that I think it's 2.5 or 2.2. It's 2 point something. It's the bigger size. And you can get those printers. I personally could care less about 2 millimeters or 1.7. But it is important because if you're buying filament, you have to buy the right filament. The filament only comes in those 2 sizes. Again, all the printing companies got together and decided that they're going to stay universal, which is very nice of them. So that's good to have, is 1.75. This is only used in the slicer interface as visual help. That's great. Don't care. This part here kind of sucks because this is where you have to figure out what you need. You can make the first layer really a little bit hotter. Oh, nice has this thing. Extruder temperature for first layer. If you want to control temperature manually during print, set this to 0 to disable temperature control commands in the output file. I don't know what I'm doing, so we leave it as it is. And then the other layers are 210. This is in Celsius, so that's really freaking hot. The bed itself needs to be 60 C, which I agree on that, and it stays 60. The actual bed, like the bed that it prints on, has to be electrically warmed up before it actually starts. So the extruder itself, which is what shoots out the plastic, it has to be obscenely hot. And then the bed itself that it's going to dump all its plastic on has to be moderately hot. For all you Americans out there, if I'm not mistaken, about 40 Celsius is roughly about 100 degrees Fahrenheit, give or take. All right, filament, we've already done that. Cooling, fan speed, bridges fan speed, disable fan. If estimated layer time is below 20 seconds, fan will run at 100% and print speed will be reduced so that no less than 20 seconds are spent on that layer. However, speed will never be reduced below 15 millimeters per second if estimated layer time is greater, but still below 100 seconds. Fan will run at a proportionally decreasing speed between 100 and 100%. Well, Between 100 and 100%. I mean, I guess that's going to be really rounding it off there. During the other layers, fan will always run at 100% except for the first layer. Well, so it basically runs 100% at all times. That's great. Keep fans always on. Enable auto cooling. This thing is built already ready to go. This thing has been tested, so all these settings should be really good. You shouldn't have to do anything drastic except tell it whether it's going to be 0.2 millimeters or 0.05. There's the speed. Print speed override. You can actually, it defaults to 15 millimeters a second. 15 millimeter cubed, sorry. So it's amount of metric space that it is, the maximum volume speed allowed for this filament. So it doesn't actually print 15 millimeters a second. It prints 15 millimeters in volume. It's a bunch of more wording here, and it basically tells you just a maximum and the ratio between the amount of volumetric and the actual speed. Again, we're going to keep that as it is. There is coding that we can add to it, which is always great. Notes that you can talk to, and dependencies that you can work on, all of which we're not going to worry about. The printer settings, same thing. Bed shape, it's already set. Zero offset is at 0. This value will be added from all the 0 coordinates. It's already set to 0, so it's good. I only have one extruder. That'd be cool to have like 2 or 3, but you only have one. And then Octoprint upload. There is a software that is similar to Slicer that does with Octoprint. If I'm not mistaken, it runs off of Raspberry Pi. And you can go in there and basically hook up your Octoprint, your Raspberry, directly to your printer, and then you've got, your IP and address and all that. And that way you hit print, and it just goes on. Blah, 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 all the rest of this. And that is the same. That is the same. Extruder is all going to be set for the test. That's good. All right. So there are no supports in this thing. Oh, I didn't do it that nice. Let's see. Slice now. I think that's what we're looking for, right? Believe. That's what we do. Let's see. Arrange. What does arrange do? It does. Oh, got to click on it. Arrange does nothing. Scale, I've already done that. Split, we're not doing. Settings. There we go. Settings. Dwarf house. Ooh, you can rotate within the rotate. Neat. You can split apart. You can delete apart. Load generic. Extruder's default. Doesn't look like there's anything here. Layers. You can use this section override the blah 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 blah. That's not it either. And then is this the cutter? Ah. Is this the one that does that? Yeah, this is it. All right, so there is this deal here. And I remember doing this at one point. You can actually cut the thing so that it essentially will print it off in segments. So let's say that this thing was like 14 inches tall, and there's no way I can print off a 14-inch print. So what you do is you go in here and you can actually set your millimeter height. Let's say that you'd ideally want it above the door but below the window. So you go in here and blah, 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 right about there. And then you basically perform the cut. And if I'm not mistaken, it will print off the bottom part. It'll completely slice it in half. And then you got to glue it back on. But that's how that is. But we don't want to do that. But that's a way to slice it. Hence the name splice. I do not see anything that does with support. That's where I'm most concerned about right now. Copies, settings, scale, settings, export, slice. By the way, hi everybody. Welcome to the night. Good to have you here. Like all you here joining us. See, repair, slice, load, config, whatever preferences. Remember the output, rather. Suppress, show incompatibility print and filament presets. That's always nice. None of that really matters. So, theoretically, I guess this is good to go. And you would literally just go to, we already did the print settings. That's, oh, here we go. That's what I was looking at. Excellent. So, layers and parameters. This essentially is where you start the real stuff that makes sense. You've got the layer height, which we set to 0.2 earlier, and that was because we wanted to speed daemon through it. And that's how high the layers will be. And you can change this number to however you want. You can theoretically change it to 1 millimeter, and it'll dump a crap load of plastic on your bed, and it'll be a mess. It'll be just awful looking. Vertical shells. What is this? The option sets the number of parameters to generate for each layer. Note that may increase this number automatically when it detects sloping surfaces, which benefit from a higher number of parameters if the extra parameter option is available. That, if I'm not mistaken, recommend object thick walls for layer height. I think vertical and horizontal shells is just that. It actually, I'll have to check on that, but I think that's actually making the thickness so that it, so basically, if you make a paper thin model and there's actually no thickness to it, you can set these, if I'm not mistaken, to the number of, it automatically make it a thickness. It's like 2 millimeters or something like that. I believe, but don't hold me to that. Extra parameters if needed. Ensure vertical shell thickness. That's always nice to know. Add solid infill near sloping surfaces to guarantee the vertical shell thickness. Essentially, where that chimney stack is popping out at an angle, the inside of it, that shell, that will basically, they're not going to just print off, you know, a fraction of a millimeter of thickness walls, because that won't hold anything up. But if it goes in there and adds, like, let's say 2 millimeters worth of thickness as it's turning, it supports, bless me, it supports that plastic as it's jutting out from the main body of the tree and has a better chance of holding up. Avoid crossing parameters, detect thin walls. Again, this is all detect bridging parameters, which have flow for overhangs. Experimental option to adjust flow for overhangs. Bridge flow will be used to apply bridge speed to them and enable fan. There is an option in here, and this may be it, or it may be down below, but there is a way that you can, instead of choosing a support, in other words, a vertical piece, a vertical column, you can actually make, if two, let's say you make 2 columns, and they are both needing supports, they're going off in like a 45-degree angle, you can make it so that the supports, instead of vertically, they're bridging the two together, and that bridge actually holds the 2 pieces vertical or at an angle, and then you break the bridge off afterwards. It is sometimes a lot nicer to have, because if you have them real close together, there's not much material needed. In this case, we don't have to worry about that, I don't think. Seam position, you want it as close as you can, and that's literally what that is. It's, you know, where the points are of each parameter. So you have real close from layer to layer. You want the seams as tight as they can. External parameter first. Infill, this is the next more important thing. So that tree that I've got, now it is, I modeled it with a base. You remember that? Because I told it I want to build it to have a more solid feel to it. Well, just because I modeled it hollow doesn't mean that it's going to be printed, or just because I modeled it solid doesn't mean it's going to print solid. In fact, unless you're just crazy and want to quadruple or quintuple your time of printing, you definitely do not want to print a model solid. You want it to print with what's called an infill. And what the infill is a honeycomb-like structure. It looks more like a crisscross pattern that layers inside your model. You'll never see it unless you break open your model, but it basically allows for that. It's the support that you need for that thing, so that it has at least some kind of support in there. I've seen people put as little as 10% in here, which is right up here. You can change that to 10%. You can actually change it to all of it. You can change it to 100%, which that fills up everything. 0% is when you're really not, I mean, you have to be printing off like a little tiny thing. The smaller the object, the less infill it needs. 20% is the standard. I take that back. It is more common used percentage. It is just the right amount of plastic that keeps everything held up without any problems. You can get fancy, and you can actually make the pattern a certain way. Grid is usually what people want, but you can do the honeycomb that I was talking about, 3D honeycomb. I mean, you can make it all kinds of things. And if you're going to make something that's actually opened up and you're going to actually show off the infill, then that's neat. Go ahead and do it. But 9 times out of 10, if you're going to make a solid object and you're just filling it up, who cares what's any of this is, because you're not going to see it. It's going to be inside the model. So it's just like buying a plastic toy at the store. I mean, you don't know what's inside. You assume it's hollow, but it may have, these type of octagon. And then you can do all kinds of, different kinds of patterns and things like that. You can combine the infill every one layer. So basically, the infill is attached to every single layer that goes up. You can skip it, so that basically, let's say you set it to every 5 layers. And that means that there is going to be a grid that is consistently 20%, which means if you take that whole volumetric space on one layer, which is only 0.2 millimeters thick, that one single layer, if you take the area volume, the area rather, not the volume, but the area of that one layer, 20% of it is going to be plastic. 80% is going to be air. So the grid is going to be a wider grid. If you make it like 60%, then the grid becomes tighter. So you have little smaller squares in the grid than you would. And you can make it every 5 layers so that there's a gap in between these grid, or the honeycomb thing. So if you really don't feel like you need to support it that much, if it's not that big of a structure, you can crank this up to 5 or 10 or whatever, depending on how many layers you have, and save some plastic. You do the same thing as reverse. You can make it solid every 5 layers. So instead of being a grid, it's just a straight flat piece of plastic. And again, that uses up a lot more plastic. It's completely unnecessary. But if you're doing something that's going to have some stress test to it, something that you're going to squeeze overall, you may want to go ahead and fill up some solid pieces in there, because then it'll take a little bit more blunt. If you know you're going to drop it a lot, again, might be able to put that in. And yeah, you can change it to a 45-degree fill angle. You can do all kinds of things. Most of this stuff is really not that important, but it does come into factor if you have a certain type of model. These are available for you. And see, skirt and brim, I don't know about this. Distance from object, skirt height. I think that is the actual, that thing that I was showing you that outlines the object to begin with. Support material. Option for support material, contact, Z, distance. Yeah, it's okay. Speed, you can go crazy on this and do all kinds of adjustments. Again, 3D modeling is one thing. 3D printing is an entirely different beast. I mean, there's so many different options you can change on your printer. And every printer is different, unfortunately. Every printer has its own settings. And you may find that you have to go in here and change all these settings. That's why you have the benchy and things like that. So you can test it out and find what the perfect setting is, and then you go for it. If you have multiple extruders, which I don't have, that'd be neat, but I don't. default extrusion width, first layer. Again, you can set up all this crap. It's stuff that you want to do after you've been printing for a while and you know what you're doing inside and out. And you got an extra lot of plastic to just waste. If you want to print out more than one thing, complete individual objects, extrude clearance. That's all good. Notes and dependencies. All right. I think that's all of it. I still don't find any where the supports are. If anybody was interested, I had 788,000 faces, which means it takes 2 faces for every 1 poly to make a polygon. So I had double that. So let's almost say 800,000. So it was almost 1.6 million. Oh no, sorry. Do the math. Reverse. 2 faces for every 1 poly. So flip that in half. So a little over, let's see, 800,000 before. So about 350,000 polys in this tree. And it should be a lot more, because you can tell that the style in this, I'm going to have to go back in there and really crank that up, because that is just not going to be good enough for a model for resin. But for this purpose, it's okay. It did actually do an auto repaired 112 errors. Wow. 4 edges were fixed. 1 facets removed. 27 facets added. Let's see, 0 facets reversed, so none of the polys were facing the wrong way. And then 80 backwards edges, which is kind of crazy. But it did that all on its own. That's pretty nice that it do that. What do we do now? I want to figure out the support. And it's not wanting me to do it. Well, I don't know. Print. I don't want to export STL, do I? Oh, I guess I do. I was pretty sure. I guess you can export the STL and then it'll have all the settings. But I'm kind of surprised that it has that option. Rotate. Reload from disk. Export. I already did that. Export object as STL. View top, bottom, layer. That's all. ISO view. Ooh, that's neat. Configure wizard, slicer website. Well, I guess that's it. It doesn't want to talk about supports and things like that. Maybe it doesn't need a support. Sometimes it doesn't. If I really was actually better than I thought I was, I'm kind of surprised, because I thought some of these things, oops, I did not want to move. I didn't want to move that at all there. Where did I? That's good enough. Export config, quick slice. Yeah, so you can basically just slice that thing up and tell it what to do. But it seems like I don't want to slice that. It was trying to do something else. It was trying to actually do more than just slice. So I guess that's it. Just layer edit. Layer edit. Left mouse, add detail. Right mouse, move detail. Reset to base. Shift right mouse smoothing. Increase or decrease area. So shift right mouse. Okay, that just brought me up a mirror or a menu. That did not actually do anything. rotate. Yeah, that's weird. It's clearly telling me to shift and then hold the right mouse button, which I did, but even with shift on there, it doesn't do anything. It's just a menu. So I don't know what that does. Let's reset that. Let's reset. That's not what I wanted. Escape. How about we do the old-fashioned delete, add. There we go. Oh, it still wants to do that. We turn off layer editing that way. Okay. All right. Well, that's pretty much it. And then we just send it on to. I mean, it's at this point. Seems like it's okay. I don't know why it's not showing me a preview though. Do I have to select it? No, it was selected there. It's green there. I selected layers, 2D, and it ain't gonna show me nothing. So I guess that's it. All right. Well, that's pretty much it as far as that goes. And I'll have to look into it a little bit more to see if there's any supports, but it's pretty much ready to roll. So there's no real need for me to do any more on this. We can just delete that, minimize that, close new. We need to set new. Need to all. We just need to go new. No. All right, so now we're going to be a new project for the last hour, because it's better to model stuff on here than it is to dick around on a printer until I can figure out what it is. Let's see, what do we got next? Modeling. All right, so we've done. Oh yeah, we're doing the wishing well. Okay. So this time, now that we've got this thing ready to go. First thing we do, go to customize, go to unit setup, and it almost always, when you boot up, unless you've got it already saved, it's going to set to generic. We want it set to metrics. We want it meters to be millimeters. We then want to go to system unit setup right above it. And we make sure that the system unit says 1 unit, which is 1.0, is the same as 1 millimeter. So that we know that when we're building a millimeter, that's going to be a millimeter in real life. Click on OK. Click on OK. And we're ready. Now, first thing I usually do over here is I build myself a little model. And it's usually 12.5 in radius, 25 millimeter in height, typical size of a little miniature. And I use that just so I can have a little bit of a go-by on what's going on. And one thing I could do is import merge. And what I want to do is go to the forest cluster, take forest 18, which is the last thing I've done. Look for, what I do, box. Got box 1 and box 2. These are all trees. Master base. Yeah, that's the one I want. Yeah, that's the one I want. I wanted this in here because it has 1 inch grid. Even though we're using millimeter, we still want to kind of keep an idea. It's weird. We got to maintain millimeters for the printer, but we need to maintain inches for the grid. So we need to decide, after I zero this off by right-clicking move and select and move, and right-clicking the 2 zeros, and making sure you can see it is right on. We're right at 0. It's right on that grid. So, and then we can move this guy up a little bit. Close enough. So now we can see that if we move him, let's change colors for crying out loud. Why do we have him set to that color? We can move him right here, and you can see that he pretty much more or less fits that 1-inch grid. It's going to be pretty tight, but he's there, and that's all we care about. Just as long as he's close enough, we know that we've got a pretty good closeness to 1-inch grid here. So, at this point, we need to figure out how big we want our wishing well to be. Typically, I would say a 3x3 is usually the best for generic things that may or may not be all that interesting. If you're just building an obelisk or something random that's a solitary object, a large tome or a large crypt, something like that, maybe 2x3. But the powers of 3 really does work very well here. So we're going to try to make it 3x3. And that's going to be a big enough thing, because if he's walking up to the edge here and he's got this cylinder, which would be about yay size, not the height, but the diameter, I mean, you can say, yeah, that's a pretty decent size well. Alternatively, you could go in there and say, well, I really kind of want it to be a little bit smaller. I really want it to be within a 2x2. Unfortunately, they can't quite just stand right there next to it, because they'll be in between the grid if you wanted to, but depends on how OCD you are. But it doesn't mean that you can't make a well this big. And the more I look at it, the more I almost want to do it that size. Because a 3x3 tends to, that feels like more of a city well. Let's move this over here. Make it a copy. Move it down. And expand the radius. And now you can kind of tell the difference between the two and make up your own mind, going, well, yeah, this does look like a city well, a town well, a communal well. This is more like a wishing well or a rural well, where you have a solitary person usually coming out of it, where the bucket is, things like that. This one usually would not have necessarily a bucket. It would be probably, something like that. And the water, or even if it was, waist high, the water would be almost level to the lip. So you just dip your pitcher into it, or your pot, or something like that. This one usually is higher for some reason. Not that high though. It'd be about that high. I guess it'd be about the same height then. And you can just reach over there and drop the bucket in. So let's do that one. Let's stick with this one for now. And we want to make sure that we've got the right height. So we dig this out, put it pretty much right there on the top. Alternatively, you can really make sure it goes on the top by hitting your Align tool right here. And then click that. Uncheck everything. These are the positions you want to align it to. And right now we just want to align it to the top of this thing. So we need a Z position, which is your vertical movement. And then the target object, we want it to be on its maximum, which is the top. Minimum would be on the bottom. It's whatever the top is always your maximum, bottom is always your minimum if you build it right. And then your current object is the pivot point. Its current pivot point is set at the bottom. It's right down there at the bottom of this cylinder. Alternatively, you can always make it minimum as well, which again, the target, then current object, your object, the cylinder, would be a minimum, the bottom. Maximum would be at the top. So now the top of your object is at the top of your target object. That's why the top is connected to it. If you want it at the bottom, you just make it to the minimum, which means it's going to the bottom of the object. The maximum is the top of your current object. Target, current, things like that. So we're going to go like that, go to maximum, and now we know that it's set right where we want it to be. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this needs to be as high poly as you can at some point. You can try as long as you can to stay low poly, but you need to make sure that you're going to crank up the polys on this so that the print actually comes out really cool. We're going to go in there and actually build the stones and make them different shapes and things like that, along with the 2 wood supports that come up on either side and a little wooden roof on top. It's just going to be nothing more than a V section. So let's start with that. We don't necessarily have to make it any higher or lower. I would say that's if we make boxes for the supports, make an instance. We can keep it short. We don't have to make them too tall. And then we can make a little plane here, keeping it within the space, because we know that we're going to do that. We're going to keep it within that 2x2 grid. One segments there, and we're just going to real quick, actually just add a bid modifier. I'm doing this real quick just to show you the examples of, does it not want to bend on the z-axis? It doesn't want to bend on the z-axis. I was going to bend it right down that spline. Oh. Well. Ah. Wait a minute. Does the 90-degree work on that? No, it sure doesn't. None of this works. Interesting. Very interesting. Can I make the gizmo change? Because it looks like it's in the wrong area. Hold on. 90. No, it still doesn't want to do anything. Oh, wait a minute. Let me turn it off. No. Aha. Turn the gizmo back. Ah! I figured it out. I had to jerry-rig that one quite a bit, but it worked. There we go. Alright. So, I mean, we can make it a little bit taller than this. Again, that's at the top of his head. So, we would just want to make sure that we have enough visual reference for the bucket, because it'll be up. We want the bucket up because that'll be part of the scene. So, you want like a cone in this case. I'm building a cone. Here's a bucket. I has a bucket. And you can make the height like that so it looks more like a bucket. I have no idea why it is not assigning different colors. It says assign random colors, and I don't know why it's not doing that. I remember it was always something just stupid to do. Under preferences, I don't like, right now it's assigning every object I make that nasty light blue. And bear with me for a minute. Is it under that? Display crosshairs, default layer by now. Oh, that's right. It was layers. That's why it didn't send to objects. Where was that? Default by layer for new nodes. I think that's it. Yeah. See how it's different colors each time? Yeah, that's what it was. For some stupid reason, this thing defaults. Let me show you where that's at again. If you go to customize and preference, sometimes this turns on by default, and I don't understand why, but it says default to by layer for the new nodes. All right, that makes no sense when you're reading that, right? And what that means, you want to uncheck that, because what that means is when you right-click an object, there is object properties that you can go to right here in the middle. And over here, by default, you see how it says by layer? And it's clicked. It's built so that you can make what's called layers. And just like that, it basically means that you have a cluster of items, of objects, and they're all grouped into its own layer. So if you wanted to toggle the layer on and off, you could turn it on and off, and everything in that layer, theoretically consider it being grouped in a way. It would all come and go, and like I can change it by taking off that layer, and it's by object. That's what I want it to be, because that way the objects, when I make them, are different color, like that. And unfortunately these aren't, but in the future they will be. So we have a little bucket here, and we're going to have a little beam that goes across there, and this thing hangs down from it, which in itself is going to be a pain, because there's going to be a lot of hanging thick pieces here, and there's going to be a hole that goes into there, so we don't want a whole lot of support. But we may not be able to avoid that. There may be ways of modeling it in such a way that we can avoid having a lot of supports for these hanging pieces. We can make that so it's not necessarily hanging directly above the middle. We can make it over to one side where it's like at an angle, like it's up against the wall, and just something like that, and the rope kind of goes up to it. It's not really, but it's a part of the edge here. So I'm going to say that's fine, and that should be enough to get started. I think that's a right size. All right, let's get rid of this. Let's get rid of that. Move him out of the way. I think he's good enough. You can hide this because we really don't need it that much. And really, we could hide him. Excuse me again. We can hide that as well. All right, let's get this thing rolling. First of all, if we hit F4, we can see that there's a whole bunch, but not enough polys here. Right now, we are going to need a lot of those, actually, because these are going to be the starting points of the bricks. But the problem is we don't want them stacked like that, because bricks don't like to stack like that. I mean, they can, but a lot of the old style wells and things like that were staggered so that they were offsetting. Let's see here. So, a couple things we can do. We can make it 36, and that means that we would essentially be doing we'd get rid of all of these, and you can actually remove these edges over here on remove button on the right. Get a little nasally. The little trick here, if you click on remove, it removes those edges for you. But if you click on control and click on remove, it not only removes the edges, but then it theoretically fuses the vertices so that you have still one vertice right here. And if I check this piece here and move it, it's still connected. If I did it the other way, it would be loose right here, because there'd be nothing that had fused. It would just, that edge there that would have been part of this little intersection would be gone, so that this piece here would not have any way of connecting to this piece here. So that would be one way of doing it, going around and doing it that way, which is exactly what we're going to do. Doing it this way. If you don't like it, too bad. All right. Oop. Did I click on something else? I did. I felt like I didn't click on something, and I ended up clicking way back there. So make sure you click on the right ones. I'm thinking of another possible way to speed this up, but I don't think there is. Whoops. Sucks. Let's see, I want that one. Oop, not that one. That one. That one. Not that one. Not that one. That one. That one. This one, this one, this one, this one, this one, this one. Ooh, boy. You better watch what you're saying. You're at Rock Ridge, talking to the sheriff. The sheriff of Rock Ridge. Whoops. Fun times when you're just selecting edges. It's the best of times doing it this way. Maybe people think that there's a better way of doing it. There probably is. I don't know how to do it. So we're having to do it the slow way. I noticed today that Toys R Us still had 10% off store-wide. They're sure acting like they're really not any rush of going out of business, even though they rushed to file that Chapter 7. Let's see. Oops. This one. It's almost done. It's almost done. It's done. Control, remove, and look at that. Amazing. It is, in its own way, perfect. We really don't need the top. Theoretically don't need the bottom. Because again, it really doesn't matter if these things have bases or not, because they're going to be sitting on the ground anyway. And the ground presumably is on, some drawing of some kind of battle map or something. So it doesn't really matter what we're doing. Now, we need to make some thickness to this, though. It's going to be grabbing up there with a border. And you can use scale. This is one of the ways I've done it. Go to T so you can look at the top. Hold down Shift, I believe, and drag that baby inside. And there you go. And there you have my opening statement. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger than that, kind of like that. Might actually make it a little bit bigger. Oops. Let's go back. And the reason is because I'm making it more cartoony. The Enchanted Forest is going to be more, it's supposed to still be looking good. hopefully, but not necessarily being the ultra realistic miniatures that we're that some of them can be, and I like it to be more stylized. So then I'm going to go in here and make some depth to it. And again, hold down Shift, go down, and now I want this all the way to the bottom. I want this to go straight down to be flush with the base. So right click, because it's all about it, and just zero out your Z. Now, unfortunately, because we had this resting on top of that base, it's all about the base. It's actually above the 0 because the base was on 0, and then this was sitting on the base. So we need to actually go in here, and before we do that, we need to zero this out by deselecting the edges, so we have the actual object selected. And you can see that it's exactly 3 millimeters off 0. That means that the base is exactly 3 meters tall, which is actually great because that's not very tall at all, but just enough to give you some depth. Right-click that, and you're back to 0. Now you know you're on the ground. Now we can go back to the border, which will already be selected from where we were to begin with. Right-click our Move button, zero that bad boy, and now it is flush. And, if I'm not mistaken, we can grab this, and unlike the last time, we can actually bridge this thing, which I don't mind it being somewhat solid. Where's my bridge? There it is. And because we have the right number of edges this time, and they're all facing the same direction, the same number of polys there meet the same number of polys on the inside, and we're good to go. And we just made ourselves a donut. Now, this is going to kill you, because I could have literally gone over here to this first Create tab over here. This is stuff you learn the hard way. The Create tab right here, you got all these geometric shapes, one of which is a tube. Not a tuba, but a tube. And look what it does. Bang! Just what we just made. It literally is the same thing we just made, except that it doesn't have the sides staggered. But we didn't do it, so we're going to delete it. Did it the hard way, and this is the one we're going to keep. Besides, we already went through all that and made it look like that. Now, here's something that kind of sucks right now, is that because we removed the segments that split these polys, they're not really happy right now. So this poly here, or this, I should say, this edge, and this vertex right there, is farther out than this edge, which is really not cool, because if you go at the top, you can see that this is higher, this is farther out than this edge. But it's not like it's completely just jutting out unorthodox, because in the whole grand scheme of the circle, this, and this are in a nice arc. It just means that this piece here that was going here originally was coming out, and it was even smoother than it is. So we have made it not as smooth as it was. It is a little more rigid, and we can worry about that later. But for right now, we can deal with it as it is. Now, you could have gone in and left it as it was. For instance, if I wanted to go in here and make something similar, I could go in here, and instead of 18, I can make it 36, which is what we had to begin with. That's what everything this side's over here. But instead of, in the future, grabbing just this poly, I would grab this poly, which is the equivalent of grabbing this one right here, because it's the two of them together. So I can go in here and do whatever I want with that, because, you know, it's that part there. But I'm not going to be too worried about it. We will flatten these out when we need to. But for right now, we've got this set up. So now what we need to do is we need to split these pieces apart. Because even though you're going to have a little bit of grout in between, I mean, theoretically, you don't have to. In some literature, there was always, in fantasy literature, there's talk of dwarf architecture that is so good, the pieces do not need grout. They just all fit really well together. And it can be done in real life. You can make stuff without grout if it's set perfectly. It's just not very advised, because the grout really solidifies that from moving at all, especially with erosion after so many years. But I want mine with a little bit of gapping to it, because you want to see the individual bricks. Because again, when this prints off, you want it to be nice and detailed. So what we need to do is go in here. Oop, can I do border? No, I cannot. We go to edge and see if we can do loop. And we cannot. And that is because we removed that vertical. We removed this piece here. And as a result, this is considered not to be a connected line. Even though it is physically connected, Max does not think it's a solid line, because it's not going from a nice intersection. It's going to from T section to T section. It doesn't really like doing that. So that kind of sucks. So we'll just do it this way. Hit F, F3. You can actually see the difference in the model already. Drag select. Actually, you can just drag select all these. And then Alt in the middle, because you just want the horizontal pieces. You don't want the top and bottom. We're just worried about these middle pieces. Ignore the top and the bottom, because those are going to be separate later. That's all we're doing right here. You know what? I lied to you. Now I'm going to go ahead and do both the vertical and the horizontal at the same time. That way they're all even, because that will make a little more sense. So if that's the case, just select everything. Do I want the inside? I really don't, because no one's going to be able to see much of the inside. So we're going to deselect that. Get back to these, because I want these pieces. Actually, I don't want the base. The bottom part. I just want the top. So I've got the top pieces selected, but I really don't want the bottom part. But we'll go ahead and do it anyway, because what the hell not? Because it doesn't matter. It's on the base. No one's going to see it. So we're going to split all this apart. How are we going to do that? By extruding. Over here on the right, let me minimize soft select. See how soft select completely moves all your tools around? So you get used to where the tools are, and then you open up soft select and it like moves your tools. I'm used to minimizing things that I don't use so that my tools are exactly where I want them to be. I always think that my extrude tool's on the left column in the bottom. Right, right here. If I have soft select open, it pushes it way over to the right, and I don't like that. Hit your extrude settings. Nothing happens, but we want to do the bottom one first. The bottom one is the one that splits the seams apart. The top one determines the height of the trough. So this does not look like it's going to be going very well. And the reason is, if you can see this is extruding nicely. This is how it's supposed to be. But the top one isn't. It goes down and then it comes back up. It's not going straight across like it should. And that is because, once again, you don't have a piece going right across it. If I were to cut it, so it is right there. Oop, that is not what I wanted, young man. That is definitely not what I wanted. Behave. To the middle section. To the middle section. And if I were to select just these pieces here, just for example, and extrude it, watch what happens. Now that section splits apart like it's supposed to, because there's a piece here that it can attach to and go up this segment. So this piece will know how to do that. But it does the same thing right there. It goes back to the crease on there. So yeah, we can do it the hard way, but with time restraints, screw it. We're just going to make a tube. You guys are like, oh, look at it, he's going to redo it. Well, you know what? That's exactly what happens. You end up modeling in some way, and then you find a lot better way of doing it. And then, what the crap is it doing here? I don't know. That's good enough. Center it down to 0. Stretch up the height to the same. Let's make it 0, so it's 16 right on the money. Nick. We want the radius, that one to be where it is. We want the inner radius, right? Yeah, we want the inner radius to be about there. Let's make it 13. And let's make this 24 so that we have nice even numbers, because why not? And there we go. We've got our original piece like that. Drop an edit poly on there, get the edges, and check this out. It's a lot easier now. You can actually sit there and just double click these things. But the problem is I don't want all of them. I want only some of them. I want every other one, because again, we want these. Well, shoot, we don't really want them like that. We want fart. I do want these, but I don't want all of that. I just want some of it. So, what the hell? And then go like this. And then select these again between Control and Alt. Control being the one to select things, Alt being the one to deselect them. Now that I've got all that, now I want to unselect. Crap, I'm going to do this again. Let's see, I don't want that one. Man, it's so freaking dark. Is that what I want? Yeah. Yeah, baby. I want that. And then that. I believe. Yeah, there we go. And then this one, I want that one, that one. That seems right. There we go. The top one, top one, top one. So I might as well deselect these. Because you don't need the base. Because it's not all about it anymore. Alright, here we go. Do this around the ring, blah, blah, blah. Here we go. Bang. Got that. Alright, we got that part. Now we want to follow along as we go one-on-one. Right around the corner. Follow it along. If it's white, go all the way down. If it's not, just 2. All the way down. And just 2. Oh yeah. Make sure that we're not deselecting everything else under the sun. Which we're not. Beautiful. Beautiful. Now I'll show you beautiful. Oh, someone's calling me, and I'm streaming, and I'll have to call you back, as I'm I understand. You could use someone to talk to, and I'll be free here in about 20 minutes. But right now, we are visualizing how we're going to make this wish me like a wishing well. Bo, 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 bo. I hope I'm doing this right. I think I am. Do, 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 do. Do you know the Muffin Man? Boop, boop, boop. Nope, nope. That one. That one. That one. That one. Aha! Look at that! Yay! Save! Haven't even saved it yet. Why don't you people remind me? Wishing well. Wishing well. Alright, now we can extrude it. And we're going to get good here. Boom. Boom. Oh, we got bricks. We got bricks. Galore. We got tons of bricks. Let's make it 0.5. Let's make this 125. Is that an eighth of an inch? I think that's eighth of an inch. Yeah. No, that's millimeters. 1.25 is, or 0.125 inches is an eighth of an inch. I don't know how much that is. Not much. So let's make this like 2. There we go. Hit F4. We screwed up. No, we did the lip. Oh, the lip is not supposed to be that way. Son of a puss bucket. Back up. We're fine, though. We're fine. We're fine. Here we go. We're fine. I guess I could have earlier done that, but I didn't. So I'm just going to do it real quick. Because this whole ring, the edge does not need to have any kind of segmented capability at all. Because the stone on the top is the stone on the side. So we don't want to have, I don't want your life. All right, there we go. All right, that looks better. Really don't need the base at all. I really don't want it to put that. For crying out loud. Man, I wish it was an easy way to deselect all that. Because I really don't want to select. I don't want any of this selected. Let's see. There we go. All right. Now, 4th time's a charm, as the old saying goes. We had this at 0.2, and we had this guy at 0.5. And it didn't work. Why did it not work? Because we didn't follow the rules of decent society. Should be a negative. Negative 0.5, ladies and gentlemen, not positive. Positive comes out, negative goes in. So there we go. Finally, after 15,000 tries, we got it right. And there we go. We got our stonework. Oh, it does that, but you know what? I really don't care. We're okay with that. I mean, it's my little blemish. It's one little piece there, but and it's actually on the other side too. So I guess what happened went all the way down when I shouldn't have. Where's that at again? See, I was right there. Yeah, these pieces here should have got deselected. Now, this piece is fine. And theoretically, I could go in there and shit, I can do that real quick while I'm sitting here, because it takes all of 2 seconds to. Yeah, you don't want this one or this one. There we go. And then extrude minus 0.5, 0.2. Yeah, there we go. Deselect. Yeah, there we go. Now you got capstone all the way across on the top. It's all pretty. You got nice flush edge on the bottom. Stuff like that. Next thing we need to do, because we literally just did that for the stone, we do not want to use that edit poly anymore for that, because that we don't have to go through all that trouble again. Make another edit poly. We're going to chamfer the edges this time. And to chamfer, you basically want just about everything, except the center, because you definitely don't want that, because it doesn't matter. At least, well, you do want the center, but you want the edge. You don't want the inner part, because who cares about that? You're just going to be making more faces. And as much as faces are not a problem, it's unnecessary faces can be. Yeah, I like that. All right, that does it. And unfortunately, we don't want any of these singularities, because we're going to make the edges rounded. And you can make these either rounded or 45-degree angles. It doesn't matter. But you don't want to have 90-degree corners in a model, because sharp edges, that just doesn't exist. I mean, look how sharp that is. It's just too sharp. So in that regard, you don't want to keep it that way. These pieces are going to be a little issue that we're going to have to fix in the future. It is a matter of, if I can get around here, it's a matter of basically fusing this to there, because right now this whole model here this is part of it. This poly here goes up to here, and this line is this piece here, this edge of the trough. It comes down and then goes back in there. So it's not firing up to the pieces very well. And like I said, you just weld those two vertices together and that fixes it. But we most definitely don't want to have those set up. So we don't want this and this. We really don't want the middle sections. We really just want these edges. What if we... Yeah, I moved something. I did not. What if we just go in here and just like select just the edges? Oh, good. It literally takes forever. Excellent. What if we do this? If we go in here and deselect that, select that, get really close on that, deselect. Because all we want is just the edges of the bump outs. Nothing else. We don't want to have those. We do want to have those. But we don't have those. See what I'm saying? We don't want to have this middle section here. Or this. Or that. Or that. A little tedious here, but Rome wasn't built in a day. And neither is this wishing well. And probably not next week. Actually, no, we should be able to finish this next week, because there's not much to it. These are one of the smaller pieces. I think after this, we're going to build a little cottage or something like that. Something that has a little homey feel to it. All right. So there's that piece there. And you get the edges, which you'll chamfer. And you want those edges, and I'll just deselect what I need. I'll get rid of this and that. Looks like everything's still good. Looking good. Could probably go around and just buzz this thing real quick. Oop, I did not mean to do that. Usually escape if you screw up and push the button that you don't like. Just hit escape like you would everywhere else in a game. And it usually backs you out. Okay, there's that. And now, I'm definitely going at least to here. Get just the V's that I know I don't want. I like it like that. Alright. Need to deselect the ones I missed. Alt. You get so much repetition doing it this way that you end up learning the program and the buttons just by repetition. Got most of them. Sure, I missed one more. Doesn't look like it though. Oh, I did. Right here. Just scanning this section up here and that section down there for red, and I'm not seeing any. So, I think I got all those, which is good. And now I need the bottom here. I can double click these things and it'll select what I need and only what I need, which is just these horizontal pieces for now. We're going to ignore the chamfering the base, and again that's because we want it to look like a strong foundation, and chamfering it means that it will bring the edge inward, and they'll look like there's like a space for your toe or something like that that has some kind of a gap underneath and doesn't look like it's on the ground. And if something's not on the ground, even if it's chamfered, even if it's like a little bit like inward, where you don't actually see it touching the ground, it removes its weight somewhat, because now it doesn't look like it's solid rock on the ground. It looks like it's almost hovering, and our minds will play tricks on us and think that the thing is light as a feather, even though it's not. So I always want to make sure. And one way to make sure that it really looks big is to make the base wider than anything else. If you make it wider, if you taper it, then that will give the illusion that it is sturdy, because it is, in the sense that, you know, if it's got a wider base than the top, that means it's bottom heavy, and it's going to be tougher to tip over. Even if it's a little bit tapered, a little goes a long way. All right, there's that. So we've got almost everything. Now we need the vertical pieces here, and we just want these two pieces and only these two pieces. We don't want the insides. And this one, I think we can get it. It's a little bit. Can we go from the inside? Yeah, it's going to be a pain just to see it. So yeah, this is probably the best view. Yep. Boring. Who does this? Who sits through all this? He pushes buttons just to select a whole bunch of things that he could have done with like one button. Why is this idiot doing just so much extra work? You know, if he just pushes F3, that's all he has to do. Oh man, this guy's killing me. Well, if I'm doing something slow and there's a way to speed things up, by all means, we are all here to learn, including myself. Still learn stuff all the time. Especially in this program, this thing is completely whacked. But nevertheless, it works out pretty well. Da la 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 la. Oops. Na, 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 na. Na, 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 na. Almost there. Almost there. I say that every time the microwave almost counts down to 0. Almost there. And then that way, when the food comes out completely ruined, I feel the same way as the guy, Red Leader, who completely misses the shot as if he isn't even close to being a good shot. I mean, he wasn't even close. He missed it by like probably 50 meters, which is ridiculous in that sense. Being a Red Leader, he really had no like skills at all. All right, there we go. We got it all selected. Now we're going to chamfer this thing and hope that it looks good. So we're going to click chamfer. It's going to, by default, for some reason, chamfer likes to just automatically give you a suggestion of how much you should chamfer things. And sometimes it's really outrageous, where 1 millimeter is way more than what you need. As you can see here, it's ridiculous. So bring that bad boy back down to 0. Oh, I see that we missed. We missed all those? I thought we had all that. We missed all these base. It's weird. Thought I went through all these already. I guess I didn't. Maybe I started and I didn't finish. Oh, crap. Only looked at it like a million times. Didn't see it. Nice thing is we just double click and it will select the 2 pieces and that'll be enough. I know we're just about out of time, but I want to get this chamfer, then we'll call it good. I think that's, oh, nope, still got a few more pieces left. Yep, I know. People are desperately needing my attention, which is wonderful to know that, but I will get to them soon. All right, I think that worked, so let's try it now. So we'll chamfer it just a tad bit, not by much. Now, what you can do here, you've got it chamfered out so that it now does not have that sharp edges. But you can actually, it's a nice 45-degree look. It looks chiseled, okay, which is good. You can also increase this number here by however many you want, and it will start rounding that edge, theoretically, which this type it does. If you make it really big, you can actually see the roundness a little bit more. You can see that, and it looks more like that. I'm not a big fan of the roundness. I want it to be more chiseled. but I want it to have enough of a chisel that it doesn't quite look as rigid on the sides. And there we go. F4, and you can see that it's much different. See what? Watch this. See how it was before it was chamfered, and now it's chamfered? It's getting to be, bless me again, way too many sneezes. That basically gets me to a good stopping point. And then what we'll do is we need to change the depth of each one of those stones and then apply a buttload of polygons to it so that we can apply that noise modifier similar to what we did with the grass. Now I applied that already, and you got to see the effects of it, but you didn't get to actually see it done. So next Monday at 6 o'clock Central Time, we will bump the crap out of the polygons on this thing by adding a turbo smooth with an obscene number of faces, and we'll apply. We'll bump each piece out first, and then apply the noise on the surface so that it has a nice bumped out look of stone. And then we'll build the supports, the roof with shingles, the brick, the bucket, and we'll be calling it good. So, all right. Again, I always appreciate everyone who signs up and shows up. This is really nice to actually have an audience. It's delightful. It's kind of motivating for me. And like I said, I'm already modeling anyway, so this is already fun to do this. And hopefully you, as a user, get something out of this. And maybe you're inspired to try out 3D modeling on your own. I hope you do, because it's a really addictive hobby. And it becomes a fantastic career. You get good at this, you can make some serious money. You can make a pretty good salary on this. And there's a lot of industries that will cater to this, not just video games and movies. There's plenty of other industries out there that will love 3D modeling and will cater to it. So if you have any questions, be sure to post them on the social media outlets, the Twitter, the Facebook. If you're following them, just type in Simple Polytricks in any of your social medias and I will come up. Feel free to leave a message, comments. Be sure to look at Facebook here in a little bit, or Instagram. I'll be updating the trees after I get them final rendered, and then once they get printed off, the dwarf house will be printed this weekend. So look for that. That'll be posted up on our social medias. And that's it. All right. Thank you all for showing up. Really appreciate it. And I will see you on Monday at 6 p.m. Central Time. Until then, this is Simple Polytricks. Sign out.